Hello, you're welcome to today's lesson. Today we'll be looking at how to mark and position your buttonholes and your buttons for your blouses or shirts. So I'm going to do a video later on for shirt, but today we are working on a blouse. So I just wanted to show you how this is done. So quickly, let's go over the types of buttons we have and how you decide on the type of button you'll be using. So I have some buttons here. Um, so there are two types of buttons: the sew through button and the shank button. So these are the sew through buttons. I have the four hole sew through button. These are both four hole sew through buttons. And then I think I had another one. Okay, yeah. And then there is the two hole sew through button. This is a two hole sew through button. This is a wooden button. It's branded, and these buttons they come in different sizes and shapes also. This is a shank button. This is also a shank button. This is a covered shank button. Okay, so there is the smooth top and then there's the shank at the bottom there. Same thing with this other one. But today I'll be making use of this because I think I prefer the look of this on my blouse. So I'm going to do markings on this part for a female blouse. The buttonholes go on the right while the buttons go on the left side of the front garment. So I really do not need these parts. I need this to lay flat on the table so that I can do my marking. So how do you place the buttonholes or mark the buttonholes on the side where you need to make the holes? Before I start marking, I would have to decide on the type of button I want to use. So when you decide on the size and the type of button, in this case, this is the button I'm using. I'm going to measure the button. I'm going to measure. So this is pretty flat, so I'm good with just measuring the diameter at the top there. You see, I have 5/8 of an inch. This one over here is a bit thicker, and is thicker and a bit bigger than this. So measuring this, I may have to go around the tape, but we're not doing this now. So I just wanted to look at and see how the size of the buttons affect the size of the buttonholes you'll be making. So let's go back to this. So measuring the diameter of the button I'm using, I have 5/8 of an inch. Whatever you measure on your button, you're going to add an extra 1/8 of an inch for the hole, so that you don't make a buttonhole and then you find yourself struggling to put the buttons through. So for this button, I'm going to be making a hole of 3/4 inch. So I'm going to come here and make the markings. So I'll start from the top and then make buttons of, I normally do between 3 inches and 3.5 inches, because I like to make smaller holes so that you don't have buttons that gape or open up, and then you can sometimes see through or see the person's body. So for this, I'm going to be making horizontal buttons. So my buttons are going to go across like that. Why we avoid making vertical buttons is that you're going to have a hole going across. And once you put a button vertically this way, sometimes you find that the fabric moves up, and if you're not careful, you might have a situation whereby a part of your shirt or blouse moves up that way. But when you have it horizontally, it can only move sideways. But I'm going to do the marking so that you see how that is done to avoid any wardrobe malfunctioning. So I'm going to start. I always like to have enough space at the top there, at least a quarter inch from the top, the neckline of the garment I am working with. So this is how the first button is going to be. So once I have this, then I mark the point where my first button is going to be. So I like to mark them first. So I'm going to like, for this I'm going to have 3 inches space in between. So we have black dots on this fabric, so I might not see some of the holes because I'm using a pencil. I usually use pencil on light fabric sometimes, and I use it very lightly so you don't see. Most of the time I'm the only one who gets to see the markings. uh, I'm still going to sew over it anyway, so the most important thing for me is to be able to see the markings. So I'm going to get a colored chalk so that I can see the markings I make. So I have some, this is a chalk, a tailor's chalk, and then I have a color pencil here, and then I have a pencil. So depending on what you have available to you, you can use any of this to do your marking. But the most important thing is that you don't want to do markings on a cloth and then they are visible later on or difficult to wash off. So you need to take that into consideration. But for now, let me see any of these which will work best for me. So like I said, I am going to sew over this, so I may not really bother if it shows. They're all washable, so I'm still good to go. Like I said, 3 inches in between, so just dots like that. Okay, so I'm going to mark the third. Oh my god, they're fading off. So I'm being careful because I might decide to change the spaces in between the buttons. So I don't want to really make marks that are too. So I think I'm fine with what we have, because one thing I also want to look out is how much space is left after the last button. But I think I'm good with this, so I can go ahead and mark. I don't know if I can still see this markings, but I'm going to like do bolder marks now so I can. So even placing the mark is just getting me to the point where I can still see them. You might not be able to see them, but I can see them. So I have a plain fabric. I'm using this just to show you how the spacing and the marking for the buttonholes will be for sewing on the machine. So this is what I do. Um, this is the buttons I'm using. So usually I like, this is not turned over, but after turning over, just like I have the neckline here, I like to have a quarter inch away from the edge. So your button should be about a quarter inch away from the edge where the buttons are starting from. So if it's a shirt, you're either going to have a collar or a turned neckline on this side. Okay, so my first button is going to be at this point here. So this is the first button. So I'm going to mark 3 inches to the next button and then 3 inches. Like I said, I normally do between 3 inches and 3.5, but I'm using 3 inches for this. So at this first one, we have measured the button and we are using 3/4 inch for the button holes. So I'm just going to go ahead and place this in the middle of 3/4 inch. Another thing you might want to notice, be careful not to allow the buttonhole go too close to the edge of the button wrap. So what I have here is about 3/16 of an inch. Okay, If you can get between 3/16 to a quarter of an inch to this outer edge of the button wrap, you're still good to go. So I'm going to, from here, mark 3/4 down like that. I'm going to do same here. Okay, 3/4 inches across. All right, horizontal lines all the way. So I'm going to do that here again. 3/4. So I added an extra 1/8 to the length, the diameter of the button, so that we can easily slip this through. Okay, you could equally reduce that to 1/16 of an inch. You just want to not have problems when you're trying to button your shirt. So if you notice here, I crossed both ends of the button hole marking. Okay, so this is what you should have, because by the time we go to the machine, we'll close up here and then sew both edges and then close up. So this is how I do the marking for my button holes. Same thing I've done on the fabric here, but this is just for you to see clearly what we are trying to achieve here. So now we're going to finish up for the blouse and then go over to the machine. Okay, so now we're going to, I'm using this fabric once again so that you can see how the stitches work with the markings on the fabric. Now, we're using a zigzag machine, okay? So most zigzag machines will have this function. So they would usually have a stitch width regulator and a stitch length regulator. So this is the stitch length regulator, and this is the stitch width regulator. For us to do this, we need very short length, and then we'll be going from a wide stitch width to a smaller one. So for the stitch length, I'm going to reduce this to 0.5. Yeah, so this is what we're going to be using for the buttonhole, 0.5. And then for the stitch, this is for the stitch length. For the stitch width, we're going to be doing oh sorry, I shouldn't move this. This is the lever for the stitch width, so I'm going to move this. Now we're going to be using 2 gauges for the stitch width, so we're going to use 1.5 and then we're going to use 4. So we're going to use 1.5 for the sides of the buttonhole, and then we're going to use 4 to close up the 2 ends where we have this marking. So we're going to use 4 to close up the cross parts of both ends, to close both ends, and then to run both sides we're going to use 1.5. So I'm going to show you how this works as we go. So now I'm going to place this under my machine. So what I try to do is the cross part gets in between here and it's in the middle, just right under the needle here, and then this straight line is going to align with the space in the middle of the machine here. Okay, so you see a line in the middle there. Let me see if this can go closer. Let's see. Okay, good. Okay, so there is a line in between here. That line should be right on the line where the buttonhole is. All right, so I'm going to start sewing now. So press a foot. So now I'm going to start with the stitch width. I'm going to move this to 4. Like I said, the stitch length is just going to be on 0.5. Now I'm going to cross 1. So I need to move. I need the needle to be right on the crossing there at the beginning of the line. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now I've closed the end, the beginning there of the buttonhole. Now watch, I'm going to move this back to 1.5 because I'll need smaller width now. So I've moved back to 1.5 and then I'm going to sew on the left side. So I'm going to sew until I get to the crossing at the end. So you have to watch. So I'm there now. So I'm going to take this back to 4 and then I'll cross it. I'll cross it now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I've crossed it with 4 there. So I'm going to move this back to 1.5. Okay, and then move my needle to the middle and turn the fabric around. Okay, did you see that? Now turning the fabric around allows me to sew on the other side. So we started this way, we sewn to the left side. Now we're going to sew on the left side. I'm going to turn this around. So after you sew with 4 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, I moved this back to, yes, the setting here back to 1.5 and then placed the needle in the middle. Okay, and then I turned it around so that I can sew on the other side. Now I'm going to drop my presser foot with the needle on 1.5, with the setting on 1.5, that's the stitch width on 1.5. I'm going to sew the other side. Okay, so this is what I do. So when I get to the end again, I can move back to 4, move my stitch width back to 4, and then I cross. I don't need to do 3 anymore, just to finish that up. And this is what we have. Let me cut this. So this is what we have. So I'm going to take this one more time and then you'll see how I did it. So starting again, I take the marking here, place it under the machine, just right under the needle, bring down the presser foot, and then put my stitch width on 4. You can make a wider stitch width, you can use 5. Okay, but I'm fine with 4 because I don't want it too wide. I'm using a small button. Okay, so I go again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now I've closed up the end there. Now I'm going to take the So I've crossed to the end here with my stitch width on 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Yeah. So now I'm going to move the stitch width back to 1.5 and then sew the side. When I get to the cross at the other end, I'm going to move this back to 4 and then cross. Okay, 4 times again. After crossing, I'll move the stitch width back to 1.5 and place the needle in the middle there, lift the presser foot up, turn the fabric around, drop the presser foot, okay, and then move. Now I'm going to sew down on the other side with my stitch width on 1.5. So when I get to the cross again, I move this to 4 and I finish up. So for this last one, I'm going to take the camera closer to the fabric so that you see how the stitches go. So now I can take this off. So we've done 2 now. So the last one to go. So now we're going to do the last one, and then I'll show you. I'll take the camera closer so that you see how the stitches work. Okay. So with my machine, sorry, with the presser foot on the cross. All right. So remember, at this point, I'm going to use 4 to cross. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and then I'm going to move it to 1.5. So working with the stitch width now. So the stitch width is on 1.5. Now I'm going to sew. I need you to see this. I'm going to sew all the way down. So once I get to the cross, I move the stitch width to 4 again and cross. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, move the stitch width back to 1.5. Bring the needle to the middle. Okay, and then move the presser foot up, turn the fabric around, and then sew it back down. So getting back to the cross there, I'm going to move back to 4, and then I have to center this, and then cross it. All right, and we are done with the last one. So I'm going to take this off now, and so this is what your buttonhole is going to look like. Now I am done with making the buttonholes. So the next step will be to open up these buttonholes so I can do the marking for the button placement. I'll be using a seam ripper to cut the holes open. Now you have to be careful with this. If you have a sharp seam ripper, you want to be careful not to cut beyond See how that went. You have to be careful not to cut beyond the opening for the button. So I've gotten close to the end. I'm just going to put it in through the other end and make sure, yeah. So I'm done with that. So I'm going to do this to open up the rest. So I've opened all the holes for the buttons. They are all open now. So the next step will be to place the buttonhole side over the part where I want to mark for the buttons. I'm going to pin this so that the fabric doesn't shift while marking. I need the buttons to be placed exactly at the point where I have the buttonholes. This has to be placed exactly how it should look after the button is done. Move this back a bit. To pin this in place. Because once you place your buttons, that's exactly the shape you'll get after buttoning. I need to hold this in place to be sure it stays exactly how I want it. Sorry, I have to pin all the way down. So I think this is fine. Make sure all this is straight. So I'm going to take let me use this. Now I'm going to mark. When I'm marking, I mark close to the outer edge. The reason is so that by the time I place the buttons, even if it pulls this way, it's on the edge, it's not going to go any further. So when you're marking your buttons, you don't mark on the inner edge, you mark on the outer edge, because that's the point where your button holds and stays in place. So I'm going to mark it all the way down. Okay, all the way down. Again, by the time you sew your buttons on this, the marks won't be seen because the buttons will be right on top of them. Okay, so that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. I'm going to take all the pins out now and then sew the buttons on the marked spots. Let me show you what the spots look like. The buttons are ready now. So the next thing we'll do will be to button the shirts. I advise you always button your shirts once you're done with the buttons and the buttonholes. So this allows you to see if the size of the buttonholes fit the buttons. Okay, so you should be able to button with ease like that. So like I said, you should be able to button, see, without struggling with your buttons. So we're done. This is the last one. We have this thread sticking out here. Trim off everything.